শুরু করছি এ মাসের the Anita Dialogues. Good evening, good afternoon.
Recording stopped.
Welcome once again to this month's edition of the Anita Dialogues. As usual, I'm very privileged again to have with me Dr. Anita Pfaff as my esteemed co-host and the illustrious daughter of Netaji, and a very eminent set of panelists whom I will introduce in due course in connection with this month's topic. But at the very beginning, I wish to say Shubha Vijaya to you, Anita ma'am, and I hope that you had a nice time in the past few weeks. And I know that today is your younger son's birthday, and I hope that you did spend a nice time with him.
Vijaya, greetings to all of you, and namaskar.
Thank you.
Jai Hind.
So October is actually, if I were to put October in the right perspective, October could have been what August is to India's history. And why August is important in India's history, we all know. But what could have happened if 21st of October 1943, the legacy of 21st of October 1943 had continued in its full throttle, is the purpose of this month's discussion. And before going to that part of the discussion, I would very quickly like to run you past our journey till now. As you know, on behalf of Sampriti, we have been holding Anita Dialogues every month since February earlier this year. And we have been doing this as a run-up to the celebrations of Netaji's 125th birth anniversary, where we try to discover the life and legacy of Netaji every month, together with Dr. Anita Pfaff joining me as my co-host, together with other esteemed panelists. And as a quick recap, you would all remember we went past February, March, April, and currently we are in the 9th episode of this. And we have 3 more to go before we celebrate the completion of 125th year of Netaji's birth. And throughout this last many months, we have been privileged and enriched by the insights and the wisdom of many scholars, writers, researchers, and similar people, 2 of whom are with us again this month to discover and discuss the topic of today. Before we go to the topic today, I essentially want to introduce them. Dr. Anita Pfaff is with me anyway. She is there every month. But completing the panel for today is Mr. Sumeru Roy Chaudhary, some of whom you have seen in the past month in the August episode. Mr. Sumeru Roy Chaudhary is actually an architect by profession, but after retirement, he has spent most of his time in researching on Netaji. He's an avid columnist on Netaji. He doesn't leave any chance to correct any misinterpretation about Netaji's history and facts. And at the same time, he is an active social media enthusiast who runs a number of forums which tries to allay any kind of fact that goes in the contrary to what it actually is on Netaji. Mr. Sumeru Roy Chaudhary today will help us decipher the history of the INA and the Provisional Government of Free India, which was set up in Singapore in 1943. Welcome, Shumiru Babu, and nice to have you again on the Anita Dialogues.
Namaskar, everyone.
My second guest today is a very special person because last time when he came in the month of March, he came along with his mother. But Sanjay Chaudhary is a person of his own right and merit. He is actually a communications expert and a graduate from XLRI Jamshedpur. And he has spent 40 years in the corporate world, handling various corporate mergers, acquisitions, etc. But he has another very illustrious belonging, and a belonging which many of us would have loved to be as well. He is the son of the great freedom fighter Bharti Asa Sahai, who was with us in the month of March. She is 93 years old, and she was part of the Rani Jhansi regiment, which marched towards the Burma border during that 1944 campaign. Not only that, Mr. Sanjay Chaudhary also has another very privileged bloodline in the sense that he is the grandson of Mr. Ananda Mohan Sahai, who was the Secretary General of the first cabinet of the Provisional Government of Free India that was set up by Netaji. With these two illustrious gentlemen, I'm sure that the next hour or so that we talk and discuss about Netaji's government, and in fact, the first free government of an independent India before 1947 is going to be a worthwhile discourse. So Sanjay ji, once again, welcome, and nice to have you back. And I hope that your mother is also fine.
Thank you very much. Yeah, she is fine. Yeah, 93 is a long batting period, but anyway, she's okay. And thank you very much for all the good things you said. I am very proud of being the son and grandson of people who were associates of Netaji and fighters for the nation. So very good. Let's go forward.
Thank you. So, of course, the day belongs to both of you. And in fact, we would be on the listening side of things, but I can't hold myself back than talking about something which led to this. We all know that Netaji came to Germany, and after spending 2 years in Germany, he undertook a very perilous submarine ride in 1943, in early 1943, which took him from the port of Kiel in the north of Germany to Sabang in the Malay Peninsula over an underwater ride of 3 months. From 9th February 1943, when he started in Kiel in the north of Germany, he passed the Cape of Good Hope, and on 22nd of April 1943, he was transferred from the U-180, the German submarine, to the Japanese one, I-29, which then took him to Sabang in 1943. That was the transition, the most dangerous mission, and the transition of Netaji from the Western theater of the war to the far Eastern theater, which perhaps has never been replicated in known history or known in the recent past. But what we are going to discuss now is, after having completed that transition, what did he do on the Eastern theater of the war that led to the declaration of India's independence of the Provincial Government of Free India in 1943. And to talk about it, we will seek the wisdom and the scholarly disposition of Mr. Shumiru Roy Chaudhary, who will take us through the next part of the history, where what happened after Netaji landed on the Eastern Front. So, Mr. Roy Chaudhary, I will invite you first and like to hear from you about the next periods in Netaji's life.
Thank you. The defiant patriot Subhash Chandra Bose, he arrived in Singapore in July 1943 from Tokyo after an arduous submarine journey, which you have already explained, from Germany to East Asia. Soon after his arrival in Singapore, on 4th July, he accepted the presidency of the Indian Independence League, which was the civil administrative wing of the Indian National Army, INA, as was decided by Sri Raj Bihari Bose. Soon after taking that charge, Subhash decided the INA needed dates and events to celebrate, to stimulate the nationalism among the Indians living there. So what he did, the very next day, 5th July, he announced to the world the existence of the INA. It wasn't proclaimed very much outside before. So he announced the existence of the INA on the 5th of July and gave the call, Chalo Delhi, to Delhi, to Delhi, Delhi Chalo. That's what he did. His next action was the formation of the Women's Regiment, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. This he announced on 12th July, 1943. That means just within a week, he announced that. This force of several hundred was led by Captain Lakshmi Swaminathan, a doctor living in Malaya since 1940. Again, the next day, 13th July, he recognized and expanded the Indian Independence League, the IIL, from 5 departments. It used to have 5 departments only. He expanded it to 12 departments by opening up Department of Recruitment, Department of Training, Department of Supplies, Overseas Department, and others. Next, exactly a month later, he announced the existence of the INA and its mission. He took over its command as the Supreme Commander on 5th August, exactly 1 month after after announcing the existence of the INA. He took over as the Supreme Commander. 2 months later, that was the grandest day of all, 21st October 1943. On this day, Subhash Netaji announced the formation of the Provisional Government of Free India, in short PGFI. In other words, Ārzī Hukūmat-e-Āzād, or in short, Azad Hind government, an Indian government in exile, which means a government temporarily established on foreign soil following the occupation of its own territory by another authority. This government started functioning from Singapore with 11 ministers and 8 representatives from the INA. Now you can see Subhash was declared as the head of the state, the Prime Minister for War and Foreign Affairs. Lieutenant Colonel A.C. Chatterjee was made the Minister of Finance. Dr. Captain Lakshmi Sehgal Swaminathan was declared the Minister of Women's Organization. Sri Ananda Mohan Sahai became the Secretary General with ministerial rank. Sri S.A. Iyer, Minister of Publicity and Propaganda. Then the representatives of the INA were Lieutenant Colonel J.K. Bhosle, Lieutenant Colonel Loganathan, Lieutenant Colonel Ehsan Qadir, Lieutenant Colonel N.S. Bhagat, Lieutenant Colonel M.Z. Kiani, Lieutenant Colonel Azid Ahmed, Lieutenant Colonel Shah Nawaz Khan, and Lieutenant Colonel Gulzara Singh. This was the ministerial formation. Then came the advisor. Raj Bihari Bose remained, he was the pioneer in this, he remained as a supreme advisor. Then there were advisors from different stations. From Burma, it was Karim Gyani. From Thailand, it was Devnath Das and Sardar Ishar Singh Narula. From Hong Kong, it was D.M. Khan. And from Singapore was Ye Yalappa and Mr. A.N. Sarkar. This government was recognized by 9 Axis-aligned countries. They were Japan, rather I would put it the other way. They were Germany, Italy, Croatia in the Western Hemisphere, and Japan, Burma, Thailand, Philippines, Manchuria, known as Manchukuo that time. Then Republic of China, the Wang Jiwei group. I mean, China was split up into a few domains. The Wang Jing group recognized this. These were the 9 countries which recognized the INA, the PGFI, the government. And a note of congratulations was received from the Prime Minister of Ireland, Eamon de Valera. This now, in this picture, which you see, the government, the members of the PGFI. In the center, you find Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Standing on his left is Lakshmi Swaminathan, and on her left is Sri A.M. Sahai, Anandamohan Sahai, whose grandson is with us, Sri Sanjay Chaudhary, who will, I would request him to take over from me and give a detailed picture of that time. Over to me, Mr. Sanjay Chaudhary, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sumir Babu, for a very nice description of course, there's so many details and so many exciting things that happened after he landed and he came to Singapore. That unfortunately the shortage of time is a problem. But anyway, I hope people will read about it. What I have allocated and what our host Shaibal has asked me to do is to talk about the way that Netaji was able to, quickly take charge and put in an administrative machinery to govern the area. Please remember that when this happened, there wasn't even a piece of land which could be called India under the INA. So those were things that had to be addressed, and there had to be an organization which would then do that. When he came back after the Greater East Asia Conference, he was increasingly concerned with the mobilization of resources. Now, these were resources which should come from the people, come from Indians living in the various countries there, and because that was what was going to feed the final thrust, the final target, which was Delhi, Chalo Delhi. That is where this Chalo Delhi comes, because that is the target which he set for his band of initially small, but which grew to be a very, very large force. But it was not war only that he was planning. I mean, he had to prepare for war. He looked much beyond that. He saw that coming times, he would require the resources for building and setting up a country which would be sustainable. He says somewhere that with a legacy of an insolvent, impoverished, disrupted and underdeveloped country, which would need to sustain itself, in a post-war world, which was in economic chaos. So that was the huge task that was there in front of him. Some of the immediate steps that he had to take was to get order and some kind of a system. But he already had thought of this. That was the excellence of Netaji, that maybe he thought about it during his days in Germany. He saw, after all, he was an ICS person who kicked the title. He was brilliant. He saw the British government in action in India. He saw the Germans, known for their efficiency, run their country. And he was himself a political person, so he knew how nations had to be won. So he had probably put all this already into his, put it down somewhere. And we discover, and I came across this, actually it was some of the American Secret Service who discovered this tract, which was called the Blueprint for the Conquered Areas. So this administrative system was put into a 27-page tract, which had 13 chapters, 3 appendices, which would lay down the administrative setup of the PGFI. Chapter 1 related to the administrative structure. On top, he was there, and the provisional government was there. Under him, he had the plan for the provinces, which were states. Remember that states, there was no state at that time. Okay, but it was already planned for. And then, of course, he had the various departments: internal affairs, public entitlement, health, social welfare, agriculture, industry, labor. All these had their own importance and had to be planned at this stage. So you can see probably on the PowerPoint, all the details are there. I don't want to take too much of time there. He had to establish the headquarters. After all, where was he going to work from? So Singapore was chosen because that is where they were working out of. The Indian, the IIL was there. And it was thought that a little later, when the army moved forward, there would be a forward headquarters in Rangoon. But he needed a piece of land to call India, which he procured from the Japanese. That was the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which he named Shahid and Swaraj. And that was Colonel Dr. Loganathan was appointed as the Chief Commissioner. A.C. Chatterjee, Lieutenant Colonel A.C. Chatterjee was made the Governor of all liberated areas. So Colonel Loganathan reported into the Governor of liberated areas. And as they went forward, they had many such positions. And there was a system of sharing that, okay, these are the things that the state government would look after. If there was a problem, they would refer it up. And he had levels, right to the village level, the mandals and the pramukhs, the mukhyas. They were all Indian, Hindustani words, which were being used in India. And the mandals. So at various levels, even the town administration and all was already. So these were things that he already had, and it was put into that 27-page tract. There was this thing of organizing the Indian International Independence League, which was there before Netaji came, led very ably by Rajbihari Bose as the president. My grandfather Anand Sai was the general secretary. I think Devnath Das and others were there. There were chapters in various countries in Southeast Asia. And so there was a ready-made thing which he did not want. He didn't want to reinvent the wheel, but improve on it. So he took that in and built on that. He had, of course, Rajbihari Bose and various other people of the IIL as advisors to his council of ministers. So, this, and the best part about Netaji was that he could take everyone with him. There was no acrimony, like at the time of, unfortunately, Mohan Singh, that the Japanese felt that he was not working out. With Netaji, he was able to balance his own team with the Japanese. It was very important to have the Japanese with you at that stage when you needed their help. Not that he ever gave in. You know that the moment they entered India, he signed a pact with the Japanese that whatever had to be dealt with in terms of local administration would be done by the Indians, not by the Japanese. Now, that was a huge thing to say to a power which was, which was almost like a sponsor of your own. And you're telling the sponsor that, look, okay, thank you very much. Stay out of this place. So those are, and the last thing I would say, apart from all the different departments and all that were there, which was very important, and each part of that administration was being taken care of. The police were appointed, IGs, DIGs were appointed. The constabulary was, women's department was so important and uppermost in his mind that they shouldn't be exploited. Labor, after all, where would the labor come from? And they didn't want to go and use the exploited labor or exploitation of labor, which was of Indian labor, which was being exploited in the various in the plantations. So all these things got done. But now, the honey on which everything works, money. So so that was when he decided to found the National Bank of Āzād Hind, which was formed in Rangoon on the 5th of April. The Japanese were very unhappy about it. They thought that, this guy is going beyond his brief. And so they gave him all kinds of, the discussion lasted 3 days. And they went hammer and tong, coming up with all kinds of reasons. Netaji, in his own manner, finally called a spade and just told them that, look, this all will be sorted out. So don't worry. We are going to do this. So this is what, this is how, of course, Mr. Iyer was appointed the chairman. There were these 4 very, very senior, very rich people who were from the banking world. They were from Burma. They were from Singapore, Malay, and all that. And these are the people who, we've all heard of Mr. Dinanath, but he was not the only one. There were 3 others, Mateha, Dr. Alagappan, Mr. Betai. So these 4 were there. The best part is that the Japanese, who were scared that, because they had their eyes on the huge money resources in Burma, especially, and Malaysia. And their own banks were by then almost empty. So when Netaji's call went up, he thought that we will collect a few million rupees. His first, when they launched, 5 million rupees at that time was raised immediately. 25 lakhs was paid up capital. Over a period of time, 150 million rupees was raised from Burma and another 50 million from Malay. Whenever there was a shortage of funds, I know for certain what my grandfather has told me and he's written in his books, that people gave freely, especially the Indian women. who just came and took off the bangles of gold that which they, and Indians always carry gold. They just took these out and gave him. Take it, it's for India. And these are, mind you, these are people who had probably not even seen India. They had not visited India. Their grandfathers had come as indentured labor. And yet this idea of India that Netaji sparked in their hearts was what was his main contribution in my view. That's all. I think that is kind of gives you a picture of how this happened.
Thank you. I think that is a very short and crisp representation of the formation of the PGFI and its governance. Anita ji, any comments from your side?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment on what the formation of an exile government meant for India and also meant for others. It's because it has different connotations. One, of course, was a more psychological one, to have something to rally around for the Indians who were fighting for independence, and something to look forward to, then to have their own state as a free state in the future, operating totally independent of occupation. So that was a look ahead, but it also had some relevance in the relationship between the freedom fighters and the states who supported that. For example, Netaji already tried to form a provisional government of India when he was still in Germany, but the German government was not willing to support that because agreeing to the formation of a exile government also involved a certain recognition of the freedom movement as such, and Germany and to a degree also Italy were a bit more hesitant in going ahead with that, but Japan was more forthcoming, even though, as Sanjay mentioned, they were not too happy with all the things that did occur. So it was partly a recognition of the movement, partly a recognition also of Netaji himself, because, for example, in the Asia conference, which was mentioned before, he could speak as a head of state, even though the state had not been fully formed with its own territory at the time. In Germany, they had only agreed to sort of give him a quasi-diplomatic status. That is, he was treated more or less like an ambassador, whereas the formation of the government during the time in the Far East involved far more. Of course, it could also involve far more, because at least the symbolic control of a piece of land, so to say, made only some sense. In the Far East, it would hardly have made any sense if the German government, for example, had made an island in the Atlantic Ocean or the Baltic Sea available to India at the time as their territory. So I think we also have to keep in mind what the reason for having a government meant for different people involved there.
Yeah. Actually, there's a couple of questions that are there, which I would like to take now. But sorry, did I interrupt you, Sanjay ji, or
just one small thing? What Anita ji just spoke of, that that the possibility of the Germans, or rather the Japanese, and I had said that they were. Let me tell you that these were the middle-level officers who were, who were doing this. They were influenced a lot by the economic conditions, etc. But when Netaji had come. Before that, you must remember that Mohan Singh had not left a very good impression of Indians. As it is, I know from what my family tells me, is that there was a certain kind of, looking down on India, that what kind of people are you? You are 200 years, you are slaves, and you have not got up and fought. So this was something. All that changed when Netaji met Mr. Tojo, Hideki Tojo. Of course, he met the emperor also. But more importantly, Tojo is the one who really turned, and then everything fell into place because he was thoroughly impressed that he said, this is a man we can work with. I mean, because that was the kind of effect that Netaji had. Asia Co-Prosperity Conference, it was Bamon who came up and said that, look, we have to support India, all our nations, because without a free India, we're not going to get rid of imperialism. So which is a huge thing. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that as an aside. Please carry on.
No, it's just a connected question, a historical question. There is no right or wrong answer to this, but I would like to know your perspectives, your individual perspectives. If 1857 is considered as the first war of independence, is 21st of October 1943 eligible to be called as the first Independence Day of India? What's your views?
Oh, since no one is talking, let me just tell you a little piece of information. There's a huge function being organized on the 21st of October in the Red Fort. I and my mother have been asked to come, but I may not be able to go because of she not being able to travel, etc. But I have a feeling that some kind of an announcement of this kind will come. Anyway, this is.
I have no insider information, Mr. Chaudhary. This is just a provoking question. I thought that I can ask.
You please carry on and ask. Be as provocative as possible.
No.
Yeah, carry on.
From a historical reason, I personally feel, if you ask me the question, had the Burma campaign not failed, then this would have been official by now.
Of course.
It is the stoppage by General Slim's army that perhaps has put that brakes on commemoration of that date. That is my personal perspective, but I thought that, but you gave out some interesting piece of news in advance, it seems. Yeah.
Let's hope for it. But let me tell you that it was not General Slim's ability to push us back. One, of course, was the problem that our support base was gone. The aircrafts were not there. The Japanese went back. And more than anything else was the fact that Germany lost the war, and all the Americans with the full Allied force landed up in Calcutta, and then the Allies put everything on the table to defeat this, because it was like the INA and the Āzād government was like a slap in the face of Western imperialism. So anyway, just a view again. Of course, we'll be the happiest people to have this 21st October as our Independence Day. And like many people say, 15th August was a transfer of power. It was not an Independence Day. Anyway, these are things that can be discussed till the cows come home.
Okay. So going ahead, I think Shomiru Babu talked about the personalities who made up the first cabinet of the Provisional Government of Free India. And of course, on the top of that list was your grandfather, Mr. Chaudhary, Mr. Anand Mohan Sahai. But surprisingly or sadly, not much is read or heard or known about him maybe because of the fact that we don't talk about our real freedom fighters in unison as we should do. So I would like to take this opportunity to ask you and give us a rundown on the biography of Mr. Anand Mohan Sahai and his achievements as a part of being Netaji's closest circle, as well as a top-ranking minister in the INA and the PGFI, of course.
Okay. I'll quickly get into it. I don't want to make it too long. Anand Mohan Sahai was born in a village in the state of Bihar in 1898. He was reasonably good in studies, and but his real interest already right from the 7th, 8th standard was veering towards this whole thing of being ruled by a foreign country, a foreign power. He was associated with the Anushilin Samiti of Bangladesh because there were activists there in his village even. And so he did some work there. After school, he wanted to study medicine. Somehow medicine and law were the two professions that people chose because who did not want so he wanted to be a doctor and serve the people that way. So he was admitted in Patna Medical College, but just then Gandhiji, alive with his non-cooperation movement, and there was a huge thing, and he addressed meetings, and Sahai himself and couple of other students with him convinced them that let's go and join Gandhiji. So he chucked up his studies and left. He was working there in the Congress as an assistant to Rajendra Prasad. In fact, during the Gaya Congress is when he met Subhash Bose for the first time, when Subhash Bose was still with, Deshbandhu was his mentor, and they were working in the Gaya Congress organizing. Anyway, so just taking that, he decided that, look, this is not for me. The non-cooperation is over. He wanted to get out. He wanted to, some people said, go finish your studies. He wanted to go to America to do it. Obviously, the British didn't want him anywhere near America, so his visa was denied. His political file was not a happy thing for the Brits. He managed to go to Japan. He met Rajbihari Bose, and they decided to split up. Rajbihari Bose told him that don't work in Tokyo. Tokyo is very closely watched. Please remember that that was the time when the Anglo-Japanese, Anglo-Nippon treaty was still in force. Okay, so there was, Japan had not. And one of the reasons that Subhash Bose mentioned later was that he did not want to come to Japan because there was this treaty already. And he would not have, he didn't expect the Japanese government to really have talks with him. So together, and so he shifted base to Kobe because Kobe had very huge number of Indians there, especially Indian businessmen. So he collected funds for the Congress. He kept writing articles in papers. He came out with a newspaper called the Voice of India, which was a bilingual, English and Japanese. You can see his wife there in that group photo where Netaji is in the middle, and his wife Sati Devi, who in her own right was a freedom fighter and a niece of Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das. And so these two got married and came to Japan and kept working. Sahai couldn't keep a commercial job. He admitted that, look, my heart was not in it, but there was money had to be. So he taught English in the YMCA, but he kept his thing of creating awareness of the Indian independence movement all over Asia. All the countries he visited, and there are many, many pictures of him addressing. There is one picture that you see up there on the left. which is a very faded sepia picture. That when if you see, the people are holding a newspaper in the hand. Raj Bihari Bose is in the middle. Sahai is on his right. Netaji.This is there somewhere, and a few other people. And this was on the day war was declared, because it was a very exciting time that at last we know that Japan has chucked the Western treaty and now we can talk. So this was earlier. Sahai, because of his work, was already well in touch. Please remember that Raj Bihari Bose was a Japanese citizen that time. The Indians there saw Sahai that he is not a Japanese, so he will think for us. So he kept playing this game of keeping the flock together. In fact, on the 1929-26 January, when Subhash Bose announced this direct action, and that was declared, and he raised the Indian flag there. My grandmother Sati Devi was quite a person in her own right. So they asked all the Indians in Kobe to come and put up your tricolor. All of them did except 3. So she went out with a box of matches, took down the Union Jack and burnt it. The British authorities there, of course, complained to the Japanese, and the Japanese said, "I'm sorry, we cannot arrest Mrs. Sahai. We don't arrest patriots." So that is, I'm just giving you these little bits and pieces to give you a feel of the time. My grandfather's own autobiography is a book called Stirring Times, which I had the good fortune to get published. When Subhash Bose, when he came, when Netaji came to Japan, and because he already knew him, my grandmother were distant cousins, but they knew each other from childhood. My grandmother, of course, was younger than Subhash Babu, almost by about 8, 9 years or 10 years maybe. But the families knew each other. So they went to meet him. He was very happy to see them. That was when my mother took the opportunity of asking him to join the INA, which he said that you're too young, come later. Okay, so that is what you see some pictures here of arrival in the Andamans, and then you have some more pictures there. I think overall, once Netaji came, then Sahai had to do a lot of work, because he was a person who could be his political advisor in Japan. He knew the people there, the people knew him. Raj Bihari Bose trusted him. Please remember that Raj Bihari Bose was also pretty old by then. So Sahai was with him throughout, and then they kept working together. Shaibal, you said that we don't hear too much about him. Well, he was that kind of a person, and he didn't talk too much, and he didn't get into situations where he could be, where he was there. He was with Netaji as his advisor, and also in terms of, he had a huge role to play in that, running that government, whether it was the flag or the national anthem or the badges and the design of the money and everything. He was the Secretary General. That means all the secretaries reported to him. And the Secretary of the IIL and the Secretary of the Āzād government had to work together. So that is how the government worked at that time. Let me now just go to the last part. After the atom bomb fell and all that, much earlier, in that same year, much earlier, there was this, Netaji was misinformed by the Japanese about the real condition. But when he heard, he told Sahai to go to the front and get a report for him. So he, General Chatterjee and Dost Muhammad, they went up to the border areas, met the soldiers. They found that there was a huge that things are very, very, very bad, which they came and reported. So that's when Netaji said, "Ki look," and the Japanese had also by then retreated and given up. They were in a very bad shape. So he decided to say that, okay, we pull back now, but we pull back only to fight another day. So that is when the pullback happened. Of course, before that, when he heard and some of his commanders say that they were he committed that all soldiers, whether they were men, women, Rani Jhansi, all these guys, whether they are trainees, they've just been trained for 2 months or 1 month, he said, send them all to the front. But when he saw that, okay, this would not be the most sensible thing to do, because they had to fight in future also. So that is when the retreat happened. And of course, there are so many stories of such bravery during that time, when everyone was retreating and the Rani Jhansi regiment was also retreating. Netaji was asked to come by plane. He refused. He came with the soldiers every now and then. Although my mother knew him, but she said, I never met him during that time, but I could see that he's coming and he was asking and making sure that and he felt very responsible, I think, for all these girls who had come from their families and of course for the men also. But he came back. Sometime in late July 45, he asked Sahai that, look, things don't look too good. Why don't you go and find out? Find a place where we can have refuge, and a neutral place, which is not with the Allies. Sahai said that there was a possibility of doing it in China. He said, do whatever. So Sahai went to went to China. Things didn't work out because those guys were scared that the Allies are going to win. So why spoil your record now? So that is when he decided to go to Vietnam. And Ho Chi Minh was an old friend of his, although Ho Chi Minh was not in power. It was the Chinese who were in power at that time. There was an interesting interlude that when he told the Chinese, we want to come and stay, the Chinese commander said, why should I allow you? He said, but why don't you allow me? Because I'm not your enemy. I haven't fought China. INA has not fought China. And you have not, so you are in a kind of a situation of, enemy is friend. So he said, yeah, that sounds good. So they gave him, so all the senior officers were there. And in fact, that last flight, many of them stayed back in Saigon. Some people went forward. And then, of course, that last flight was there. He came back along with, they were arrested in December 1945. They were put in Pearl Hill prison. Things were very uncertain. But then, as everyone knows, then the reprieve came. The Brits really got scared that we can't touch these people. They were released. My mother and Sahai's brother, who was the director of intelligence in INA, they all met in Singapore. They came back to India. Sahai, after independence, he was offered to get into politics, which he refused. And he was also very, very sad because the partition had happened. He says, this is what we fought for. I do not want to join any political party. But Nehru, maybe he saw that there was here was a talent he could use. He knew Nehru, of course, from earlier days. So he was given an ambassadorship. He was an ambassador in various places, including Vietnam. And you can see a picture of Sahai with Ho Chi Minh, old friends. And so he was there in Thailand. Before that, he was in the Caribbean. He was in Mauritius and as in charge. He retired in 63 or 64, I think 63. And when again he was offered to come into politics, which he refused, went back to his village in Bhagalpur, which is a very, very, very backward village, and kept working on education and women. and for education of women, and stayed there. And then did a lot of work because he built colleges, schools, etc. But didn't get into politics. So maybe that is the reason that he refused to write his autobiography. But only when I was in college did I, that he started writing something, and I was very happy that he was dictating and I used to type it. And that is how this book came around. It came around after he had passed away. So that was Anand Mohan Sahai for you, and his dear wife Sati Devi. Both made a life of, fighting for independence. They had their children there. Gladly gave one of the daughters to the fight. And so that was that. I think, Shaibal, that is, maybe I pulled it a little long. I'm sorry, but
I think what I was thinking when you were speaking is this event that we do every month. I think one of the accomplishments that I personally feel is not only do we get to know more deeper into the life and legacy of Netaji himself, but also about unsung heroes and people like A.M. Sahai and others who were trusted colleagues of Netaji, about whom honestly I would not have known unless you would have come to the show along with earlier this year and now, of course. So deeply grateful that you shared the life and times of Anand Mohan Sahai, which many of the viewers would also perhaps, who are interested in history, would like. Thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, for those for that.
Thank you.
So from one of the INA veterans, A.M. Sahai, we will come back to INA, but this time we will try to just close the topic around INA and PGFI. And Shumiru Babu, if I can please call you back. And Anita ji, please add your perspectives as you feel relevant on the legacy of the INA and the PGFI. What do you think is carried forward from the INA and PGFI onwards, post-independence and beyond? Shumiru Babu, if we can start with you.
I would like to thank Mr. Sanjay to give us so much of information that we didn't know. It was very good for us to know this. So coming back to the INA and the IIL days, so this, I would like to say this government, the provisional government, was actually a culmination of the political movement originating in early 40s. It didn't drop from air. It was a culmination of the movement that was going on for the liberation of India. And this government of Āzād Hind had its own currency, court, civil code, and the national anthem, Subh Sukh Chain, we all of us know. The INA had its motto also, Ittifaq, Itmat, Qurbani, that is unity, faith, and sacrifice, and its national greeting, Jai Hind. And this gave a greater legitimacy for the independence struggle. Now, to keep up the spirit, I would like to inform that the INA and IIL had chalked out a program during those days, immediately after the government was formed. So first thing they decided to keep up the spirit, that the 21st of every month thereafter was marked as a day of celebration. So they used to hold mass rallies with the members of the INA, Rani Jhansi Regiment, and the IIL with civilians, and would affirm allegiance to the Āzād Hind government. School children sang the Vande Mataram as the national flag was hoisted. Leaders would inform month's progress at the end of the program, which included narrating advancement of the INA at the Arakan front, update on gradual transfer of headquarters near to the Burma border, and later setting up of the INA headquarters in Rangoon, which happened on 25th of January 1944. And its monthly financial position also they used to tell the audience. In an arrangement with the Japanese government in November, partial governance of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands were taken over by this Azadian government, PGFI, in November. On 13 November, I think the date is 13th, in November, Bose renamed the islands as Shohid and Swaraj-Deep. The INA used to celebrate Gandhiji's birthday. But in addition now, the INA and IL started celebrating Netaji's birthday too. Massive processions were brought out in Singapore. Sports events were held where school children participated. And at the end of the program, they reaffirmed allegiance to Bose. They also decided to celebrate Netaji Week. All this to keep up the tempo of the nationalism, the Indianness of the Indians abroad. So they decided to celebrate Netaji Week every first week of July to commemorate the arrival of Netaji in Singapore. And interestingly, the week was observed not only in 1944 and 1945, but continued even after the war. Now, actually, war means losses of lives. So losses at the Indo-Burma border necessitated commemoration of the fallen soldiers. Netaji laid the foundation stone of the memorial. It was named the Memorial to the Unknown Warrior of the Azadian Force. This foundation stone at Singapore's Padang near Connaught Drive was laid by Netaji Subhash on 8th July 1945. Colonel Strachey of the INA was the architect of the memorial. This memorial, in the absence of Netaji, this cenotaph, was unveiled on 23rd August 1945 by laying a wreath by Major General Kiani, Major General Alagappan, Dr. Lushmaya, Vice President of the IIL, and other leaders. The word Ittifaq Itmat Qurbani was inscribed on the memorial. On receiving the confirmed news of Netaji's death in plane crash at Taihoku, a large group gathered at the site of the memorial on 26th of August to mourn Netaji's untimely and tragic death. A Japanese newspaper reported that at the ceremony, this ceremony lacked nothing in solemnity and dignity. Wreaths were laid at the memorial in honor of Netaji. Speeches on Netaji's life were made by Kiani, Alagappan, and other leaders of the INA and IIL. Unfortunately, soon thereafter, British troops entered Singapore on 5th September, and on the 6th, they dynamited the memorial, reducing it to rubble. But this did not dampen the Indians over there. Despite this demolition, pilgrimage to the INA memorial continued. A noticeable ceremony was held to keep up the tradition of celebrating the 21st of every month. In February 46, a few months later, a crowd of 200 gathered around the base of the memorial to commemorate Bose's declaration of the Azadian government. They erected a makeshift wooden plinth, which bore the words Army War Memorial under a large photograph of Bose, and laid wreaths. Then every month this was celebrated. Azadian Day on March 21st was celebrated, however, in Kuala Lumpur, when Jawaharlal Nehru arrived on a tour to Singapore and Malay from 18th to 26th March 46 to collect data for the INA trial at Red Fort. He was greeted by a guard of honor of Rani of Jhansi veterans, together with the INA veterans. And given the nearness to India's independence and public mood, the British deemed it wise not to interfere. Earlier, while in Singapore, Nehru laid wreaths, a bunch of roses at the INA Memorial on 19th March, after which he addressed a mammoth gathering at Jalan Besar Stadium. Now, if I continue, if you allow me to continue, again, the next month in April 21st was celebrated again in Kuala Lumpur, where Thivi, former General Secretary of Āzād government, addressed an association of Indians saying the war has awakened Indians to a sense of unity and they are now conscious of their own rights. Then again in March 21st, there was a noticeable celebration at the destroyed site of the INA Memorial in Singapore. Indians from Singapore and different parts of Malaya came to lay wreaths and observe 2 minutes silence following the lectures. The program was organized by a newly formed Malayan organization, the Indian Relief Committee. During this time, members of the IAL and INA formed the Malayan Indian Congress, which established the Hind Volunteer Service, HVS, a paramilitary organization out of the trained young men and women of the INA's youth section. The Malayan Congress followed the IAL organization structure to carry on the independence movement and to represent Indians' interests. The volunteer service staged rallies in uniform, advocated India's independence and ran camps. The HVS was intended to continue the sense of discipline and consciousness of unity and nationalism imparted on the youth during their training in the INA. Do you have time? Shall I continue, Mr. Shaibal?
I think what we will do is, what we have rather planned to do is, you please continue, but we will have another session in one of the coming months on the legacy and the PGFI, seeing the details around the implications and the influence of INA and PGFI. So if you come to a logical point where we can close it, then from there we will continue in the one of the next sessions.
I just want to say that this celebration and this spirit continued till India's independence. Even the 3rd anniversary of the proclamation of PGFI was celebrated on 21st October 1946. On this day, a 13-feet high wreath was placed at the war memorial. I mean, the tempo that was built up prior to the end of the war continued till the independence movement. So this was continued till the end of when India's independence became reality. Because this August 21st of 1947 celebration was held on 15th August 1947 at Singapore. Yeah, I would like to just mention an anecdote sort of a thing about a mention by Singapore's long-time president, Mr. Nathan, S.R. Nathan. He was the president of Singapore in 1999 to 2011. Mr. Nathan was a second-generation Singaporean who became president of Singapore. When he was in his teens, he recounts Netaji's. He saw Netaji for the first time. So he recounts, in July 1943, he was watching from the sidelines a meeting organized by the Indians. So Subhash Chandra Bose, he was just a teen there. Subhash Chandra Bose began to speak on the fight against the British for India's independence. At that time, it began to drizzle very lightly. The people in the seats, mostly the well-dressed Indian couples sitting in the front rows, became restless and began to move to take shelter. At that moment, Bose raised his voice over the microphone and boomed, He declared he had come a long way at great risk to himself to pursue the struggle for independence. He was shocked to see those in front of him run at the slight sign of drizzle. What kind of people are they? He had come to ask for their blood and they ran just because of a slight drizzle. Did they not see it as their duty to liberate their struggling brothers and sisters from British bondage? The crowd quietly sat down again and stayed in their places until the function was over. This was Netaji. Bose's speech mesmerized Nathan. The way Bose commanded over the mass and influenced the audience with his oratory filled with reference search for justice. Half of the crowd did not understand what he was saying. It was in English, perfect in diction and delivery, but they were in awe. This was Netaji. This is how he captivated, mesmerized the people all over the world, wherever he met them, whoever he met them. Over to you, Mr. Shaibal.
It is such a detailed history, Mr. Rajchodhuri, that we could have gone on and on and on. But I'm conscious of the time that we are already past the hour mark. So we will.
Shaibal, can you give me 20 seconds?
Yeah, please.
On something?
Yeah,
just want to mention that when my mother went to Japan for the first time after she came away in 92, she went to Renkoji temple to pay her respects to the remains of Netaji. The Reverend Chief Priest there, Mochizuki, whose father was there when my grandmother had put the ashes there or the remains, that gentleman made a comment of which I am still smarting and hurting. He said, what kind of people are you Indians? All of you have reached Delhi. And the man who gave the call is still lying here. Are you not ashamed? I just want to leave it at that. Please carry on.
Of course. And I think this is a very important point that you mentioned, because Aim Sahai's role, or rather your grandmother's role in taking and preserving those ashes in that very crucial week or days after 18th August is extremely, extremely important, because it could have gone anyways. And whatever I think Iyer writes in Unto Him a Witness actually is a big testimony. That is another part which perhaps is worth mentioning. And what you mentioned about the Reverend Priest, I would like to give a big shout out to Dr. Leonard Gordon here, because I can see him joining us. He also mentioned the same thing last time when he came in August, and talked about his research and the Japanese he met, and the reaction was exactly similar. What kind of people are we that we are leaving these ashes out there? But anyway, we have to take it up in a separate discussion altogether. I would like to leave the closing comments of today's session with Anita ji before we bring this episode to a closure.
I think we have heard a number of important about a number of important events that took place during this very crucial period of the struggle for India's independence. And I think it is very appropriate that in one of the remaining sessions, we should sort of reflect on what did the independence struggle, particularly also Netaji's and the INA's independence struggle, mean for India going towards independence and after independence. I think one aspect I would like to sort of add, which was not really touched upon today, we have to look at the situation during that period also from a geographic point of view, so to say. The major part of the Indian population, of course, lived and worked, and many of them also struggled for independence in India by different means. But there were a number of Indians, both in Europe and also in the Far East, who did not live in India. And as you had mentioned before, many of them had never been in India and still sort of maintained their Indian identity. And it is very amazing that they could sort of been inspired by Netaji and by other freedom fighters to commit themselves to the independence struggle of a country which they had never seen, or which they had only seen many years before. And I think, going back to what the provisional government of India means, it is mainly for them also that this government was important. Because, I mean, evidently it would have been rather unlikely to form a provisional government of India in India during the time of occupation. It would also have been very difficult to do that. But I think forming it abroad meant a lot for those Indians who sort of rallied around the flag, so to say, outside their country. Of course, the Indians in India at the time might have been inspired, but of course, very little was known of what was going on in the Far East at the time. Had we had social media as we have today, it certainly would have had a different impact in India itself. This way, looking back on history, of course, this impact took place in India mainly quite a bit later, when more became known about the efforts that had been put forward particularly in the Far East and partly also in Germany. Ultimately, we have to realize that it takes many smaller and bigger steps to reach an important goal. And the struggle for independence in the Far East by Indians and with the help of others certainly was one very important part in that struggle. So Jai Hind to all of you, and to those of you who have been celebrating Vijaya, all the best, and Vijaya greetings.
Vijaya.
To Vijaya. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating topic on Sunday, late afternoon, evening. Grateful to have you in this session. The Anita Dialogues, of course, continues. This is an initiative that we have taken from Sampriti President here in Germany to commemorate Netaji's 125th, the lead up to Netaji's 125th birth anniversary. And that's how we come back every month discussing a specific topic around the life and legacy of Netaji. So 4 days from now, 21st of October, is the day where it is the another anniversary of the proclamation of the provisional government of Free India in 1943. And similarly, we will discuss other milestones of Netaji's life in the coming months as well. Thank you. Good evening, and see you in 14th of November around the same time here online. Have a nice evening. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.
Good night, Jai Hind.